What causes much of the world's conflicts? Well, if you agree with these guys, they'd say religion is the catalyst for almost all of the world's violence.
I think faith-based religion is the motherlode of bad ideas.
People will kill each other's children for ancient books and caves and relics.
There is a logical pathway leading from religion to the committing of atrocities.
Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, and Richard Dawkins are considered to have launched a strain of thought called New Atheism. It's a small but incredibly vocal group. But how accurate are the New Atheists in their broad claims about religion and its role in global strife?
It's also the case that people do violence on behalf of nation states and flags and kings and oil, and the list goes on and on.
Hey guys, I'm Omar, and this Sunday we're talking about the New Atheists, their problem with religion, and how that impacts how we talk about faith. There are many different types of atheists. Atheism is the lack of belief in the existence of a god or divine power, and it's been around forever. But in the United States, the number of people who say they're atheists has doubled since 2007. A new political movement among atheists burst onto the scene in the years following 9/11, and they were everywhere.
I'm an atheist with respect to the Judeo-Christian God.
We are absolutely at war with Muslims.
And you, as a level-headed guy who understands.
Journalist Gary Wolf coined the term New Atheists, a movement among non-believers who are united by what they believe are rationalist anti-God claims. The New Atheists believe that religion threatens progress and ultimately breeds conflict. They also believe that if religion were eliminated, many of the world's problems would disappear. They're very confrontational, as Professor Bill Kavanaugh explains.
It's an atheism with a certain kind of a polemical edge, creating a distance between people who believe and people who supposedly don't believe. So the idea is that I have facts, but you have mere beliefs.
In fact, the way the New Atheists aggressively challenge religion is what they're most known for. They even mock faith and believers.
Because if you believe something without evidence, then that justifies anything.
But their ideas don't necessarily represent those of most atheists. The vast majority of them, 65%, say they rarely or never discuss their views on religion with religious people. And some atheists, like humanist chaplain Greg Epstein, see New Atheist rhetoric as problematic.
There are a lot of people in this world who see religion as their culture, their community, their family, their ancestors, and when we openly mock every aspect of it in a way that is very likely to be interpreted as disrespectful, then we are driving a wedge between ourselves and them.
Writer Luke Savage says New Atheists use a facade of rational arguments to legitimize Western military interventions.
There are people that see a lot of illiberal and anti-Enlightenment tendencies in kind of modern society and culture. And foremost among those is religion.
One of the New Atheists' central arguments is that religion is inherently violent. They also believe that religion is behind much of the world's violence in both the past and the present. And the religion they happen to be most critical of is Islam. But we'll talk more about that later. Right now, let's discuss where New Atheists claim to get some of their ideas, the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was a period between the 17th and 19th centuries where the idea emerged that human beings didn't need an institution like the church to live a good moral life. Human rationality should be at the forefront of that. These ideas emerged during a period when political corruption and tyranny were rampant across many European monarchies. And they were propped up by the church, which many even argue was used as an instrument of oppression.
It takes on a particular sort of polemical edge in the current context because it really establishes a divide between social orders in a lot of ways.
One of the main critiques directed at the New Atheists is that they examine so-called religious violence in a vacuum. Critics say their arguments completely ignore the role that land, resources, money, and power play in getting two sides to use violence as a means of achieving their goals. The New Atheists also dismiss, ignore, and erase centuries of history and simplistically pit complicated conflicts as simply faith versus reason.
We never go to war for a single reason. Military historians tell us that there are always multiple factors involved. Military, territorial, and above all economic, as well as political and social.
That's religious scholar and former nun Karen Armstrong. And in her 2014 book, Fields of Blood, she argues religion is used as much to promote violence as it is a sanctuary from violence. This hasn't stopped New Atheists from having a list of go-to conflicts that they repeatedly provide as examples that religion is synonymous with violence, like the Crusades. And then in Ireland there were the Troubles, which pitted Irish Catholics who wanted to reunite Northern Ireland with the Republic of Ireland against Irish Protestants who were loyal to the United Kingdom. New atheist Christopher Hitchens said it was a conflict where religion spurred much of the violence, which resulted in more than 3,500 dead.
400 years and more in my own country of birth, of people killing each other's children, depending on what kind of Christian they were, and sending each other's children in rhetoric to hell.
But Savage says that argument is flawed.
The conflict in Northern Ireland, which he'd actually personally observed, kind of omitting or overlooking at least, really the central element in the Northern Irish conflict, which was British involvement in Northern Ireland.
There's one other thing we need to highlight in this debate about religious violence: the number of conflicts that haven't involved religion at all.
If you ask the question, who has killed more people in the last 100 years, Muslims or atheists, the answer is atheists, and it's not even close.
Let's explore one of the most infamous ones of our time, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which allegedly pits Muslims against Jews. But how true is that statement? Jewish atheists led the Zionist movement that created the State of Israel. They argued for a Jewish nation-state as a response to European anti-Semitism. Meanwhile, Muslim and Christian Palestinians live under Israeli occupation in the West Bank and Gaza, and protest Israeli efforts to claim Jerusalem together. It's not hard to see how Israel's displacement of and occupation over the indigenous Palestinian population, rather than the differences of faith, are the sources of the strife. And here's what Hitchens said shortly before his death in 2011 on the conflict.
Because of the divine promises made about this territory, there will never be peace, there will never be compromise. There will instead be misery.
I think that religious ideas are often used to legitimize violence. I think often a more useful framework for thinking about the sources of conflict is nationalism.
There's one more example that new atheists often use to make their anti-religion points: ISIS. ISIS is the militant group that took over parts of Iraq and Syria, spreading its violent messianic version of the Islamic faith. The group killed all who stood in its path, whether they were Sunni, Shia, Christian, or otherwise.
ISIS is behaving in a way that is sanctioned by a literal reading of the Quran and the Hadith.
But ISIS and Islam may not be as closely aligned as Harris presents.
I can't think of a better illustration of this than the two young men. They were from Birmingham and they went to join the Islamic State. And they quite literally bought a copy of Islam for Dummies from Amazon before they left.
ISIS's creation is a side effect of the 2003 US invasion of Iraq, which created a political and security vacuum that allowed such groups to flourish. According to Savage, it's pretty common for people to look at conflicts and tie them to some ancient disagreement, instead of Western military involvement, which actually creates those modern conflicts. New atheists emerged after the September 11, 2001 attacks in the United States and have consistently attacked Islam.
I regard Islam as one of the great evils in the world.
The idea that Islam is inherently violent is a really widespread idea that's not just limited to the new atheists, but they've given it a particularly sharp polemical edge.
In 2017, a Pew Research Center study found that 41% of US adults believe that Islam encourages violence more than other faiths. Half also thought Islam was not a part of mainstream American society, with 44% saying that Islam and democracy are incompatible. But many new atheists consider themselves true liberals or guardians of liberal values. In fact, 69% of the atheists in the US lean Democrat and are more likely to hold liberal values. Yet, the new atheist views are illiberal. And that's why Sam Harris and others believe there's a crisis of liberalism, because much of the left in the US would criticize them.
What we're seeing on the left is a kind of censoriousness and really kind of an authoritarian moment.
The new atheists' ridicule of Islam has made them allies of the neoconservative right.
The new atheist affinities for the right and for the neocons in particular are really quite explicit. There are a lot of people who are followers of new atheism that don't entirely realize that the politics of it are often rooted largely on the right and might be appalled.
So why is it so important to examine the new atheists' ideas? Well, these guys are an influential bunch. They've had books on the New York Times bestsellers list, and they've had large platforms to broadcast their ideas. It's because the new atheists' abrasive approach to religion is seen as driving a wedge between religious folks and non-believing ones, instead of finding common ground. So when influential people like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins make statements like, Islam is the motherlode of bad ideas, or I regard Islam as one of the great evils in the world, does that make bigotry more acceptable in our society?
I don't think there's any way to kind of answer this in theory, that belief in God either does or doesn't produce violence. It all depends on the context.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please let us know what you think in the comments. I'm sure the conversation is going to be really lit this time. Come back next week for another great video, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.